Chief Seattle once said, "My people are few. They resemble the scattering trees of a storm-swept plain." There was a time when our people covered the land as the waves of a wind-ruffled sea cover its shell-paved floor. But that time long since passed away with the greatness of tribes that are now but a mournful memory. Keep this in mind as we discuss today the recent discovery of mass graves in British Columbia, Canada. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
Again, thank you all for the really thoughtful comments you've been sending us.
Yeah, indeed, Ross. And also we wanted to thank our new Patreon members who have joined the membership. And for you, if you like our videos and you like to support us, consider joining the membership on a Patreon. So once again, thank you very much. Back to the topic.
In British Columbia, it was recently uncovered that there were 215 graves of Native American children who had been attending a school that was meant to genocide their culture. That is, they had to dress as Europeans, they had to speak English, they had to forsake their parents and their culture and their religion. What do you make of that, David?
Well, that's correct, Ross. It is troubling information that came out. At the same time, I personally, and I speak for myself, I am not surprised, given how colonial powers have behaved in the past. And by the way, just to make it clear, we're not pointing fingers at Canada here.
Not at all.
Not at all, because most of the colonials have behaved that way. Basically, why we decided to do this video is to highlight the need for Western powers to look in the mirror before they point fingers at others. That is the main reason to why we decided to talk about this. So the idea of, as I said, I am not surprised at this, but what surprised me the most was when you look at the history of when this cultural genocide took place, which was almost over a century, but it ends in 1970s.
These are really recent times that these schools finally closed.
Exactly.
And you know, Canada was still under British rule at that time.
Which begs the question, did the Queen knew about this?
No comment.
So.
Well, we know that this kind of tragedy occurred in the United States. We know that it's occurred in Africa. And right now we see a lot of very interesting behavior of European countries as they're renegotiating some things with Africa.
That's correct, yeah. Well, also because you are not going to ignore for example, I will use the term atrocities, the British colonials conducted when the last person on Tasmanian Island was wiped out. So even for Britain did not have a good record when it comes down to this. The Aborigines, how they were treated in Australia and in New Zealand to a lesser extent, you know. My point in all this is just to, when those countries like Britain, Canada, the US, you name it, point fingers at other countries, human rights this, human rights that, well, then they need to look inward first. How can you tell others what to do when you didn't even fix your own home, per se? So,
you know, another consideration here is the people who have had their culture stolen, had their language stolen, and so on, or had their ancestors killed. What impact does that have on them? Well, as a psychologist, I got the opportunity to work with a large number of those people. and they carry it with them as a very deep anger, a very deep anxiety and fear, and a long memory. And we take a look at things like when the British forced the empire in China to give them Taiwan. I mean, the Chinese emperor and the entire government were deeply humiliated and forced into that position at a gunpoint. And they had to give up Hong Kong, and they gave up other places, and they were deeply humiliated. China has not forgotten those things. It's like the rest of the world seems to have forgotten it, but China has not, and they're not going to be pushed around anymore that they're a world power.
No, not at all. And this is why now you notice in Africa, the former colonialists are now apologizing to African countries. Well, they're not apologizing because they feel guilty about it. They're apologizing because they see in China is increasing its presence in Africa without having to impose its will on the African nations. Rather, they are there for business. If you want to do business with us.
And they have no bad history.
No, not at all. Not at all. That is the reason why they're doing what they're doing. So, but just for this one about Canada, is the government in Canada did recognize that the government has committed genocide. Back in, it was a committee called the Truth and Reconciliation back in Ottawa. In 2015, if I'm not mistaken, a report came out indicating that indeed Canadian government, that is, and this is by no means to judge all Canadians that way.
No, not at all.
Not at all. They're wonderful people. They did recognize that the federal government did indeed commit a genocide. I really find it very sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's encouraging that the Canadian government today is taking steps, the necessary steps, to fix all these problems.
Trudeau came right out and said, look, we did it.
Yeah.
And this is a horrible, horrible thing. Yeah. And the Canadian government did it.
Yeah, but also we need to remember back then who was, the Anglican Church was, the Catholic Church well. Was dominating this because those schools were under the authority of the church. So it becomes that question of the influence of the church on the political matters, which you still can see it today in certain countries.
Right.
England, of course, was notorious for this, how much they are influencing political decisions and so forth. But that's a separate conversation altogether. So the question I have for you, Ross, is this. As a trained psychologist, how do you think the survivor today in Canada, in British Columbia, even though Canadians are saying they're not surprised, they're going to discover more mass graves. How do you think the surviving families now is going to cope with this?
Well, having seen interviews with a number of them, they are grieving deeply. These are life-changing events when you actually get the facts of they tried to genocide our people, either culturally or they physically killed them. Yeah. And how should they feel about the Canadian government? How should they feel about Anglo-Canadians? Yeah, deep suspicion, deep resentment, and anger.
Yeah. And don't ever get me started on the Native Americans here in the United States and what the federal government did. That's another separate conversation altogether.
That's another ongoing tragedy.
That's separate, yeah. Now, the question is, what's need to be done? There are those who are saying an apology. It's first. Well, of course, an apology. But apology doesn't go far enough, in my opinion.
Close.
In my opinion. So my thinking is you're going to need to have a reparation for those survivors. Then you're going to have to include now or reinstitute the cultural identity of those who've been.
And we recognize that as remarkably hard. So much has been lost in terms of the language is gone, the traditions are gone, the lifestyle is really not possible in modern Canada.
That's correct. So it's going to be, so Canadian government will have some challenges to deal with, but at least they doing the right thing by coming forward.
They're certainly aiming the right direction.
Yeah, I will say they are doing the right thing by coming forward, and this is why we said at the beginning, like you have to think in terms of the Western world. We need to look in the mirror before pointing fingers at others. So,
You know, there's some real conclusions here, and that is the United States and other nations don't really seem to be concerned about human rights and so on. And they keep using the words of, no, we're here to protect whoever. And it's a distraction. There's no action that they're really willing to take, as is evidenced by the behavior of the governments. But people seem very concerned about, well, let's do the right thing. Well, you're not seeing the right thing being done. So let's conclude. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other videos. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
and as always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.